Will was a man of few words and yet a man of many words. A man obsessed with words, who talks little, listens much, and absorbs everything. To give you a list of the jobs he's held, places he's lived, bizarre experiences, or romantic misadventures he's had would sound like fiction. And it's true, before he cut his hair and beard, Will had the air of a magical wizard from Middle Earth. But I can assure you, he is very much a real person. In fact, I first met Will 14 years ago in a summer arts class. 14 years. Like my daughter was a baby, and now she's in 8th grade. Will stood out right away, the silver-haired dude in the back with the knuckle tats and the earrings. I took one look at him, and I thought, that guy has some stories, and second, I want to be his friend. And believe me, Will does have some story, and he's a good friend. But he isn't interested in capitalizing on the sensational details of his life. Perhaps because he's a dedicated Buddhist, Will doesn't see the many things he's experienced as the point of the story, but rather as a way of exploring larger ideas about language, culture, family, class, and social justice. Reading Will's thesis is sort of like riding into a windstorm, a swirling, spinning vortex of words about words. Here's an example of what I think of as a quintessential Will sentence, where he's talking about the complexities of language. All this dichotomous duality has got me wanting to lower the high beams, to take the shine down to shade, to turn away from the glowing goody two-shoes Minnesota nice mid-century uniformity and anonymity. When you surrender yourself to the rush and settle into the flow of his sentences, you're consistently rewarded with wonder. Will's writing about four-letter words is filled with allusions and asides, digressions, echoes, ticks, outbursts, dalliances, and sly jokes, plays on words, puns, and other fun. On the page, he is part-time oral storyteller, poet, philosopher, gadfly, and activist. His logic is associative and idiosyncratic, and there's a noisiness, an urgency, and volume to his writing that belies his quiet nature. At times, it almost reads like a sermon or a song, as if has been inadvertently shaped by those early Nazarene years. It is quite frankly unlike any thesis or book I've ever read. It's a book that blurs the lines of language origins and usage, not a strictly formal etymology, it's more of a personal etymology. The book is about that blurring of the lines. And so we see Will enacting that on the page. Finally, just let me say that my dogs, Gus and Nico, they're not good dogs. They try, but they are pretty good judges of character, and they love Will. He has been their friend and semi-regular caregiver for years now. Dogs know good people. And beyond being a good person, Will is bright and talented and an outstanding writer and a dedicated member of our writing community. He's worked in various capacities for the normal school, student groups, and the Philip Levine Prize. From day one, he has immersed himself in nearly every aspect of this program and the local writing scene, giving much to his classmates and peers. He's one of the kindest and most selfless people I've ever had the pleasure of working with. Will has made a home here in Fresno, and we are lucky to have him as our resident bard. Please join me in welcoming Will Freeney.
Wow. I think this is going to be anticlimactic after that introduction. Thank you so much, Stephen. And I want to thank Stephen, the chair of my committee, and Bryn Saito and John Hales, who are the other two members of the committee. And I want to thank all of the faculty members who have guided me along, nudged me, encouraged me, and set an example of excellence for me. And I would go on at greater length, but I only have 20 minutes and I'm cramming a long essay into it. So I'm trying to give you a sample of all of the various threads of what my thesis is. It's an oblique social justice piece, but it's also a picaresque memoir. And ultimately, as Stephen mentioned, it's also amateur etymology. So we've got a long way, as Jerry Reed said, we've got a long ways to go and a short time to get there. The word that I chose for this essay is trip. Don't trip. Trip the light fantastic. It's an archaic phrase. Does it refer to catching one of those classy transcontinental trains? No. It refers to the earliest usage of trip as a verb and refers to ballroom dancing, originating in John Milton's poem L'Allegro from 1645, which includes the lines, "Come and trip it as ye go on the light fantastic toe." So, to trip is to dance nimbly, or it was. This is not the trip to which I am prone, the lurch forward as I stub my toe on some unseen obstacle. In the book of Proverbs, it is said that pride goeth before destruction and a haughty spirit before a fall. Maybe, but my personal experience is that a trip goeth before a fall. I have scars to prove it. George Etheridge, a playwright born 20 years after Shakespeare's death, introduced a denotation for trip beyond its use as an intransitive verb meaning tread lightly or dance. Etheridge's use of trip referred to that thing we do every summer, to take a trip, to go on a journey. And we did every summer, my two parental units and I. The trip was a gauntlet comprising 1,000-mile endurance races staged between towns that had relatives we could stay with for free, punctuated by the actual stays with those relatives. Inevitably, there were nights where we needed a motel room, my father especially, after 10 to 12-hour days of driving. But there was a protocol to be followed. First, we could not even pretend we were considering stopping in a given town until we got there. If we were in your town near sunset, watch out. We were about to scour Motel Row for the best deal. There were no cell phones, so stopping to call ahead would have been as time consuming as just pulling up in the drive-through breezeway in front of the motel office and sending Dad, the dutiful driver, in to inquire about availability and prices. A queen-size bed with a rollaway for $16, Dad would inform Mom on his return. Too expensive. We can't afford that. Let's keep looking, Mom would retort. And so it went from one motel to the next, with some passed over, no blood on the mantle, just cockroaches in the breezeway. And as the number of locations left on Motel Row dwindled, the number of no vacancy signs lit rose in inverse proportion. I was relegated to praying to myself, by myself, for myself, and ultimately, apparently, to myself as well, that they would come to their senses and go back to that $16 queen in a rollaway with a pool. They never did. I think $12 was the baseline my mother was using as her lowball demand. A $4 difference doesn't seem like much now, except that it was a 33 1/3% increase then. And just a few years later, when I went on my first honeymoon in Florida in 1973, capitalism had worked its magic in the hospitality industry. For our honeymoon in St. Augustine, we had a choice between 8 Days Inn and Motel 6. Those were not random numbers they chose. That was the price of one room for one night. Alas, my years of backseat summer incarceration stretched across the 60s, and Motel 6 was just being founded by two guys from Santa Barbara in 1962. When I was in the 5th grade, still fully captive in the house and in the car. By 1968, as my driver's license arrived and my matriculation to college approached, those two guys were already selling their company to an investment group. Apparently, it wasn't Bain and Company, because Motel 6 is still in business. Thriving, actually. Thriving despite the fact that they agreed to pay $7.6 million to settle a lawsuit brought by immigration attorneys in Phoenix regarding two local Motel 6 locations where the desk staff were notifying ICE of Mexican nationals on the guest register. $7.6 million, despite a corporate protestation that this was an anomaly promulgated by rogue local employees with no knowledge of senior management. The suit was brought in 2017, the payout made in 2018. Then, in the same year, 2018, the state of Washington brought a suit against Motel 6 for providing the names of thousands of motel guests to ICE agents. The settlement was not reached for over a year, but set Motel 6 back another 12 million. Don't trip. Oh, I'm tripping, and not in a good way, not in a vacation peregrination way either. Obviously, it is not safe for a Mexican national to stay at Motel 6. But where is safe? How will you know until you hear that hammer fisted door pounding, that too loud even for the stage voice? And the real tripping block, what has me tripped up, is that corporations or their employees would volunteer information to ICE from their paid guests. Sure, they already have their money, and tomorrow's a new day, another sucker to bed and bounce, although that may refer more directly to one of the auxiliary activities which sometimes occur at Motel 6. But why, really? Where is Motel 6's quid from ICE in exchange for the quo, disloyalty to their earnest, innocent customers? The only explanation, regardless of level of complicity, is just pure, simple, racist hate, not fear, or they could have just refused them service or called the local police. But no crime had been committed. So at least one night out of the 14 maximum vacation time, Dad just kept on driving. Finally, my mother slumped to the side against the passenger door, and I luxuriated in the back seat, surrounded with luggage on the floorboards, like the baby Jesus in his manger, if the manger had had wheels and AC and FM radio. And Dad, for once in his vacation duty, swishing along across wheat fields and desert plateaus under obsidian skies, thinking whatever he wanted to, got a little bit of peace. To take a trip is the A side of that category of definition, the intransitive verb. The B side, of course, is to trip on acid or some other psychedelic. Still taking a trip, just on another route, just another dimension, where time becomes a concertina and its tune is the gently frenzied score of a 1970s independent European film. I could go on about the failures to launch with purported blotter and tabs, about the enlightening mushroom experience I eventually had at Burning Man. But they tell me that long, fuzzy pay-ins to psychedelics are not all that well received in the general populace. So that about sums it up. Tom Wolfe has given the deep deed proper immersive expression in the electric Kool-Aid acid test. The insights from that one successful mushroom trip, though, populate a new compartment of my life experience, life philosophy, life perspective. Anais Nin synoptically expressed in simple, precise language the interconnectedness of body and mind, spirit and environment, which seems apt when she said, quote, "We don't see things as they are, we see them as we are." And once we have seen through the veil of Maya, or behind the wizard's curtain, or beyond the matrix, we are different. During that psilocybin experience at Burning Man, I looked endearedly into the face of my new Burning Man friend, who had agreed to be my babysitter for the remainder of the night, only to see that all of her teeth had embedded diamonds. This was apparently not the woman to whom Paul Simon referred, who had diamonds on the soles of her shoes, or else he too was writing about a trip and got it wrong. Or maybe just differently, which I sometimes have to remind myself is not necessarily wrong. I thought, these are the images of dreams. But if with eyes wide open, we can see things that aren't really there, who is to say what is real, what is illusion, what is possible? A wink is as good as a nod to a blind boy. And corporate America has been manufacturing winks for us as fast as they can. The key for me is to not be a blind boy. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us, not delivered to us from Amazon. Fortunately, figurative eye-opening is at least incrementally easier than the miracle worker magic show phenomena, whether with poultice or palm to the forehead. You are healed. So the beachheads of psychedelia were secured and held beneath the veneer of 50s society by an eclectic group of disparate individuals. Aldous Huxley provided the literary cachet at the outset, grounded in his spiritual quest along the neurochemical pathways. His landmark book on consciousness, The Doors of Perception, was, to put it in Wordsworth's words, a spontaneous overflow of powerful feeling recalled in tranquility. That spontaneous overflow of powerful feeling having been generated by Huxley's use of mescaline in 1953. He wrote Doors of Perception in 1954 and moved on to LSD in 1955. Ken Kesey, wrestler, writer, teacher, and host to the electric Kool-Aid acid tests, became the next generation psychedelic literary figure. Nonetheless, the avant-garde of the psychedelic incursion is anchored in the public's mind's eye by two academics running clinical trials at Harvard, Timothy Leary and Richard Alpert, aka Babaram Das. In less than a decade, they were almost physically chased from the campus. A moment's reflection reduces the shock value of this sequence to almost nil. After all, Harvard was originally the academic bulwark of the Puritans. Probably the only reason that pharmaceutical LSD from Sandoz Laboratories remained available throughout the 1950s was that it was the basis for the CIA's MK Ultra program, an extended sequence of experiments built around the hope that LSD could be a new fail-proof truth serum, a new wrinkle in extreme rendition. After a decade, the CIA gave up, defeated by LSD, because the results were too unpredictable. LSD's advocates, particularly Albert Hofmann, who was the first to synthesize it and test its effectiveness himself, were all about putting it to the test. Hoffman's first test, conducted on April 19, 1943, has become known and celebrated as Bicycle Day, since he and a friend, his babysitter, rode bicycles home after ingesting 250 micrograms each. 21 years later, all grown up and disseminated, LSD was extolled by the missionary zeal of Kesey's pranksters. In between those two landmarks, many experiments were conducted, both in academic settings with assistance from Hoffman and in prototypical CIA oddity in the MK Ultra program. I promised earlier to eschew a fuzzy pay into drug experience, but I did not extend that promise to cover the grittily underwhelming tale of the first of those failures to launch. So typically for my independent research programs, things did not go as expected. They did not go as planned because there was no plan. Their arrival, these things, was not scheduled or expected at all. I was hanging out in the barracks during my off-duty time in quaint north central Germany in Ludwigsburg, the namesake locale of old crazy King Ludwig. Hanging out in the barracks offered no communal entertainment other than one pool table and a room next to the first sergeant's office. Entertainment was DIY and consisted primarily of listening to one's music of choice over high-end audio equipment purchased at low-end prices in the post-exchange. I had a cadre of first-tier friends on my second floor west wing of the barracks, but I was walking down the first floor one evening and passed an open door. "Hey, Freeney, come here." This unexpected flurry of welcoming grabbed me by the need to belong and reeled me in. They continued to be friendly as I entered the room. "Have a seat," they said, and so I did. I sat on the edge of somebody's tautly tucked bunk and looked around the room at the barely familiar faces. The most familiar of them had an offer for me. "Want to try some LSD?" Well, sure, who wouldn't? Certainly not me, ever wishing to find the secret door into the secret space marked out on the secret blueprints, the cool room. This might be it. My Army years proved to be my remedial drug education, making up for the time lost as a high school student under my parents' roof and a college student under the Church of the Nazarenes roof. Nothing thus far had proven either lethal or profound. The hash just made me sleepy and gave me technicolor dreams. The X112 just kept me up all night, even when halfway drunk. But this, give it to Mikey. Mikey'll eat anything. Sure, I said. It was a decade after the merry pranksters had left the world stage, Kesey to prosaic rural retirement in his homeland of Oregon, Cassidy to tweaking railroad walking death in Mexico. They were gone, but their sacrament lived on. Jackie handed me a small square of paper and said, "Here, chew on this and keep chewing." Jackie Flowers. He could have been the Jackie of John Mellencamp's Jackie and Diane, a tall, rangy, horse-faced guy who could have been playing college basketball instead of wearing green all day and working in a motor pool. He had the names of a flower child, though. He was the avatar of what would become of the summer of love as it leaked into the hinterlands and percolated. I did chew obediently and looked around the room, half expecting sudden transformation of the environment. The only transformation, which it took a while for me to notice, was that I was now alone. The gathered troops had departed, filtered out into the world outside that room, where I now sat waiting for Satori all by myself. Eventually, I noticed an occasional face peering in through the window as they passed by. Ultimately, I gave up on this experiment and decided to go to bed. That's when the effects kicked in. Not the psychedelic effects I expected, but the speed effects, which I could not name as such because I had yet to try speed other than X112. But that experience was an index of what I felt, like I was being wrung from the inside out. I lay down anyway, thinking I could will myself to sleep. I was wrong. When I finally gave up on that pursuit and opened my eyes, the posters on my locker did seem to have taken on a slight life of their own, but I was not impressed. I made my way downstairs to the pool room, where I realized it was the middle of the night. No one was awake, or at least visible anywhere. I racked, got a cue stick, and broke. I, a timid puny breaker by habit, slammed the cue ball so hard that it hit the one and arced off the table, clunking onto the tile floor. Wow, it didn't feel like I hit it that hard. I played my game, lost interest, and went out to visit the one person I knew would be awake, the other person operating the communications rig in the 40-foot trailer parked next to the barracks. We talked and smoked until sunrise. When I dressed for formation, word was announced that a tactical expedition to our listening post on the border would be leaving later in the day, including me. My inclusion, physically, meant my insertion in the backseat of a military Jeep, like the backseat of a Volkswagen Beetle, only less roomy and comfortable. Behind a lieutenant in the passenger seat and a staff sergeant in the driver's seat. PFC me sat there with clammy, warm skin and a profound sense of claustrophobia, looking forward to a 4-hour drive in this position, trying not to trip. Thank you.